So before we get into Cube, there were some changes made to Canadian Highlander, and I want to talk about those changes. This is going into effect immediately. It happened today. It was technically announced yesterday, but we're still... We have some council changeover. We have some, ideas for people wanting to do, like how we relay information differently. We had... I'm so fucking busy right now. Robin is in Japan, so it was a little awkward, or he's on his way to Japan, so like the timing is awkward, but yeah. What are those changes? Thank you for asking. It's great to be here. Chang. Okay, effective Monday, October 2nd, 2023, which is today. These changes are made to the Canadian Highlander points list. Crop rotation is reduced from 1 point to 0 point, removing it from the points list. Price of progress is reduced from 1 point to 0 points, removing it from the points list. Transmute Artifact is reduced from 1 point to 0 points, removing it from the points list. And Flash is increased from 5 points to 7 points. Keeping it on the points list, obviously, just at a higher total. In addition to these, we have had a change of the council. For those that watched the Canadian Highlander 2022 championships, the semifinalists, Sasha Christensen, as well as if you've followed the Canadian Highlander website, Sasha wrote an article about Doomsday decks and Breach decks. If you looked at who's racking up some W's at the in 2023 for local tournaments, Sasha's name pops up. Sasha's taken over for Pat Podberdusco. Pat lives out east. He doesn't really play anymore. He's been dealing with a whole bunch of shit. There's going to be more about that because we're hoping to run a charity tournament for Pat as well. Because his residence was hit by a flash flood and it destroyed everything. Except for his cards. His cards were saved, but literally everything else that him and his fiance owned was destroyed, basically. So we're gonna try and do a charity tournament for Pat and his partner later. In the year, there will be some notice. Yeah, there will be notice for when we're hosting it. There will be a whole bunch of information. We're currently in the planning stages and in the rounding up goodies so that we can incentivize people to donate, and outside of obviously just helping someone that is so instrumental to Highlander being what it is. Pat kind of gets memed a lot because that's just the kind of guy he is if you ever met him. But like, one of the best players to touch the format and has had such a huge impact on how certain decks are built, strategies are developed, the points list, like all these factors. On to the actual justifications for the cards. I wanted to do this in a way where I could read the justifications and also have the card on screen for those that don't know. Typically, we wouldn't be playing Magic Online, which uses like the display capture, and this would be a little bit easier, but just in case. So we're going to be talking about crop rotation first. If you don't know what crop rotation is, 1 green instant has an additional cost to sack this, or to cast a spell. You sack a land and you tutor for any land and put it into play. Right? Pretty straightforward. It's Discord, right? So there was originally blurbs written up by Spencer Konica, one of the counselors. However, I received... Thank you to Spencer for doing that. Again, we're all very busy. Spencer stepped up and wrote something. However, I did receive at least 7 messages or DMs or like ats of like, I don't understand this. What does this mean? And so I decided to... I was like, look, we've received all this. Thank you for your hard work. But let me put the Wheeler spin on this, Let me at least put my college certificate to work here and write something up. Crop rotation. So we voted on this to go to 0, and it was a 5-0. We all voted yes. Importantly, if a card is being added or removed from the points list, it has to be a unanimous vote. Otherwise, it can be a 4-to-1 vote. Right? That's the thing? Or is it all unanimous? Maybe it's changed. I think it's a 4-to-1. It has to be 4-to-1. It has to be 4-to-1 if it's just a card going up or down. If it's added or removed, it has to be 5-0. Anyways, crop rotation. So this is what I wrote up. The archetypes closely associated with crop rotation haven't been doing so well in 2023. The once dominant lands mid-range has more or less been usurped by dedicated initiative strategies and hybridized creature combo shells. So if you're not familiar with the lands mid-range deck, it was a mid-range deck that had the lands package, and it was everywhere, and we talked about the lands package everywhere. And it wasn't like a dedicated clown horn, like, oh, I'm going to Dark Depths you into the dirt. No, it was much stronger than that. It was a it piloted a lot like the 4-color Loam decks and Maverick style decks from Legacy, where you're like, I'm going to develop this Knight of the Reliquary or Dark Confidant. I'm going to disrupt the board, and I'm going to attack your mana base, over and over and over again. And then you have the creature so that deck existed. It was big. It was everywhere. One of the best decks in the format, and didn't even receive like any huge knocks against it. Like it received a little bit of splash damage from other point increases, but not that much. Like it was still a thing. Then the initiative came out, and then it was like, oh, well, this just mid-range is harder. It's like a dedicated initiative deck just goes like super ham on mid-ranging a very specific way that is all within its own control, where you're like, I'm the mid-range player playing playing the initiative cards and pushing the initiative, as opposed to where the lands mid-range was occasionally like, ooh, do I Thoughtseize or do I strip? And then it doesn't matter in the end. And then the hybridized creature combo shells. So creature combo as a whole is kind of struggling, but it has gotten more tools that kind of pairs it with the lands mid-range decks, where they both have this creature game plan that is pretty strong, a little bit weaker than if you were dedicated like Naya or Gruul Monsters style deck, but it's still there. It's just sometimes you get the combination of cards to do the thing. And for the lands mid-range decks, that thing was maybe strip locking people at like turn 6 or turn 5 or whatever. Whereas the thing for the creature combo decks was killing your opponent, or preventing your opponent from doing anything. Not just like, I'm going to start hitting you and then eventually you're going to be out of this game. So yeah, it kind of just, this deck more or less disappeared. It's still fine, but it's not really the most competitive choice. Tolarian Academy decks, right? Tolarian Academy pilots face the freest of inclusions when dealing with the new line of Rex Sages and Kasali Pride Mages, not to mention the tutors to reliably find them. I personally think that Academy is actually in a pretty reasonable spot right now. It's just reasonable at attacking certain decks in the metagame, when hopefully, like, we're looking for the Academy decks to do a little more heavy lifting, right? Because the decks that beat Academy, you want to see more of those running around, right? You want like that. Typically the decks that are going to give Academy a harder time, really fast red decks, extremely disruptive green-white X decks, like you want those to be all over the place because they're healthy. Tempo decks, well, one's not made by Surge. I'm kidding, miss you, bud. Miss him every day. That kind of stuff. And the Reclamation Sage and Kasali Pride Mage variants that we now have access to, cards like Outland Liberator, Cathar Commando, Knight of Autumn, even though it's older, Collector Roof, even though it's older, Opposition Agent, which is not in that category, but it's Opposition Agent, to even the mid-range threats, the Shieldrids and all this card. All these like extremely powerful cards that tend to punish that style of deck. Do you have a thing? I'm kind of on a big... Is this a haha or a serious thing? Sorry, I've got a groove, honey. I've got a groove. So all those cards exist. They're very free inclusions to play. Like, you're not like, well, I shouldn't play this Rex Sage because it's a low pressure card. Orcish Bowmasters, yeah, great. My brain tried to block out those fuckers, but you get what I'm saying, as well as the ways to find them. Finale of Devastation, Invasion of Ikoria. I mean, there's just better forms of card draw and selection to find these cards and repeatedly get them back. You know, there's a lot of resiliency in finding these cards, using them, and reusing them to stop Academy, all while not really making sacrifices to your game plan of play creature, turn creature sideways. And then Cradlehoof players are in a perpetual state of denial, as every red player sleeves up a copy of not just Fury, but Pyrokinesis as well. This is a big asterisk of, like, obviously not every player is playing this. Red player is playing Pyrokinesis, but a lot of the red controlling and or tempo decks are playing this card because it's just so fucking good. Free spells are really powerful. And yeah, hoof decks and other Manador Gaia Cradle decks are it's a struggle. It's a struggle. You know? And I even said it. It's a struggle out there, and the council believes that opening up crop rotation allows for some much deserved redundancy and resiliency. So putting crop rotation to 0 means that Academy decks get to free roll this card, and they can look to play something else in that slot. Could be Wishclaw Talisman, could be upgrading a Soul Ring to a Mana Crypt, upgrading a Mox to a Soul Ring, could be cutting a Soul Ring or something else and playing double Mox. Like, it just gives you more options than having to always have Academy and card that finds Academy, which is effectively 2 points on every Academy list. And then, yeah, giving more juice to the creature decks, giving more juice to maybe some Gaia's Cradle Natural Order decks, that sort of thing, right? It's just a thing that you want to reinforce because things are only going to get harder for them. Yeah, as board control becomes more... Actually, somebody asked, why are Fury and Pyrokinesis so appreciated in Canlander? Are they looking to answer something more than just Mana Elf Flood? That ties into this. 1, free spells are very powerful. 2, free spells that affect the board are pretty powerful because the game and the format are becoming infinitely more board-based. That's just the direction of design. It leads, and so, you know, I use the term board control when I talk about this, which is something that I picked up from Hearthstone a long time ago. And I think it's still relevant, even though obviously the game mechanics are different. Basically, you're looking to control the board. You're looking to play something that your opponent has to deal with in a way that is ineffective, or in a way that requires more resources than they would normally want to spend, while you are the one that is setting the tempo. You are the one that has the threat, and then you can use your removal to get rid of their potential blockers, get rid of their development. So then they're in a spot where they have to develop to the board, but they also have to deal with your onboard threats or deal with anything looming in your hand and whatnot. And free spells let you get around having to make the decision of, like, do I build to the board? Do I kill this thing? They let you build to the board, play a free spell, kill their thing, and let you reclaim tempo and board control, right? And then the default is like, even as if they're not a free spell, Fury is just a good magic card. It's a 5 mana 3/3 that Flame Tongue Kavus or kills a Planeswalker, or it's just, they're good magic cards. Pyrokinesis is going a little hard, but typically in decks that can take advantage of it. Which, you know, that's just blue decks, blue X decks. Yeah. Hi, Mulder. You want to get up here? Okay. So yeah, crop rotation. Cool decision. Excuse me. Mr. Steele, welcome back for the 7th month. How you doing? Hey. Oh no, I'm against a DJ. What up? How you doing? How you been? Thank you for the support. Vequinox for the 3rd month. Glad to have you. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. It's great to have you. Rubber Duck Sauce, welcome to the stream. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for joining the channel. Glad to have you. Good to see you. Welcome in. And Jester for the 37th month. Hey Wheeler, can't really watch live anymore, but still try to check in regularly to keep the sub going. Love your content. P.S. Patreon workshops versus Discord, right? Yes, Jester. First off, thank you for the support. If you can't watch live, are you familiar with the YouTube channel? I gotta do some stuff where I gotta have this present in the actual Twitch panel and whatnot. Maybe get it on my Twitter. I've started uploading to YouTube again. It's pretty good. All the VODs go up there with very light edits. Yeah, I think we're at 4,000 subs for that. So check it out. Yes, you can come and tell me. I know I'm gonna like it. I was just in the flow, you know? Oh, cool.
Just read this first. Just this email.
Dr. Baked Cannabis Delivery. Celebrate Truth and Reconciliation Day with... Wow, my weed is based. Thank you, honey.
More like Dr. Base.
More like Dr. Based. All right. Hi. It's a good thing. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so can I? Yeah. Next card. Price of Progress. Price of Progress went voted for 5-0 to get removed from the points list. Everybody voted yes. The initial pointing of Price of Progress was passed in a world without triomes and tri-lands. That is true. When we, I mean, maybe triomes just came out, or they came out right after we made this change. Price of Progress getting pointed was one of the most controversial decisions that has happened, and one of the most frustrating decisions that has happened. It was one of the decisions that actually made me leave the council in the first place, because it was a thing where realistically this card should have been 3 points instead of 1 point, and it was something that was pretty hard for people to swallow, because people don't understand design. They don't understand format curation. Your average player has real dog shit intuition when it comes to power level and the purpose of banned and restricted or points lists in this case. Yeah, I checked out. That was good. I wasn't playing Highlander. Very few people will. So, you know, we dipped. And so, yeah, and it happened in a world where we didn't have triomes, right? Fast forward to now, and, well, take a look around. It's fucked. A time when the council looked to encourage players to explore 4-color and 5-color options while also slightly taxing one of the top archetypes of the format. Red deck wins. RDW was one of the best decks in the format, if not the best deck in the format for a while. It is still one of the best decks in the format, and it is odd. Anytime I see anyone say that Red Deck Wins is not one of the top decks in the format, it really just speaks to either like this echo chamber effect that happens with communities, and like, well, I'm not running into it, or like, you know, this isn't getting played or whatever. It's still fucking good. It's Lightning Bolt and Price of Progress. What's bad about that? And like, yeah, we were encouraging people to move beyond monocolored decks, blue X decks, and 3-color decks that were teched to try and survive red, you know? And there wasn't that much love going into 4-color, 5-color decks, which at the time was a bit of a goofier kind of suggestion, or a more interesting kind of field to explore. Because 1, the mana bases were tough, and 2, you were just going to die to Blood Moon and Price of Progress. And some of that is still true now, but not as, you know, obviously, you got better tools. You got much better tools. And while Red Deck Wins is still a top contender of the format, The council looks to open up more 2-colored aggressive options to keep some of the greedier mana bases in check. So I've talked about this before. In that Price of Progress is a card where it's tricky with Blood Moon. Its relationship with Blood Moon gets brought up a lot, even though they're often just not played in the same deck. They can be, and in fact, this pushes to maybe see that happens more. Seeing, you know, Price pop up in Boros decks or in Gruul decks as well. Blue Moon, aggressive Blue Moon kind of decks, or just like Blue Moon decks that now have to play pressure because it's 2023. Yeah, it's a card that we hope can maybe like say like, hey, look, you can play this card for free and you get to play your GT now, right? You can play this strategy, get GT, free roll the Price of Progress, and you know, kill people. Great. Transmute Artifact, voted 5-0. We all said yes. I was going to make a write-up for this, but I just kept the same note that I had before. This card's bad. Transmute Artifact should have been off the points list a decade ago. I could have told you that. It's real bad. It's not great. It's a card that sees some strength in eggs and in Time Vault variants, and could now see some play in Welder decks even, if they wanted to give it a whirl. But it is not a card that shows up in Paradox Academy or Academy Ramp or anything like that. Maybe Staxier decks can play it, but you know, it's nah. And even then, like, this card is just not great, chat. It just isn't great. I've been playing. Somebody on the Discord said something of like, do you take that back? Transmute Artifact is a good Magic card, and I said, I've forgotten more Transmute Artifact lines than you'll ever learn. Like, I've been playing this. I know that's a very like, that's not a great justification for anything, but look, take my word on it. I've played this card probably more than any other player in the format. And it's just not a good Magic card. And the only reason it has seen play in eggs up until now, well, that's not even true. I cut it from eggs over the past year. But the only reason it has seen play is because, well, it's cool when the eggs deck goes for its worst type of gameplay. Yeah. And then Flash. So we voted Flash 5-0 to go up to 7 points. So the first 3 were all removals from the points list. They all got decreased. And now Flash is the only one that is getting increased. Again, 5-0, unanimous increase here. Lowering Flash and accompanying cards over the past several years was done so in an attempt at breathing life into one of the classic combat control archetypes of Canadian Highlander. So before these changes that we were made, Flash, dog shit deck, dog shit card. Played with it a lot myself, not a big fan. Played with it outside of Flash Hulk variants, and was kind of goofy, but obviously not great. And Flash is a touchy one because it is a card that a lot of people associate, at least in Victoria, with an era of Magic that it was dominant. And Flash was dominant for a couple of reasons. One, the best pilot in the city was playing it. And no, I'm not talking about myself or Robin. The best Magic player in Victoria was playing Flash regularly, and a series of other cards that benefited Flash were not pointed. Free Intuition, free Merchant Scroll, free Treasure Cruise, Dig Through Time, bunch of other cards. Like the Flash list that was rounding the tables back then is like 21 points or something. It's ridiculous. But other than that, bad deck, bad card, right? And so we were making changes to make Flash more of a realistic inclusion. And some of those were long overdue. Removing Summoner's Pact, just kind of not great. Removing Protean Hulk, again, not a real Magic card. And decreasing Mystical Tutor. And before people try to Flash splain Kelvin, Kelvin knows about Samwise Gamgee and Flash. I believe unless I'm misreading this, I believe Kelvin is referring to the takes that Canlander players had that even with Samwise, this was fine in Victoria, some of the Victoria players. Anywho, so we made a bunch of changes that ultimately benefited Flash. It benefited other archetypes as well that were kind of paying for the sins of Flash, the former sins of Flash, and then we started to make changes to lower Flash because Flash is a deck that actually has a pretty good matchup into the 4-color mid-range decks, the Jeskai decks, initiative decks, all that. Like you're a combo that operates at instant speed, that is primarily like it uses your graveyard for sure, but you know it's done from the hand, right? It's not permanent based. Let me open the door for Mulder. Hulk isn't a real card. Well, it's not a real pointed card, you know? Okay. While our goals were admirable at the time, the recent printing of Samwise Gamgee has pushed Flash Hulk a bit too much for our liking, especially with the added protection of Grand Abolisher in the stock Flash Hulk pile. If you're not familiar with this pile, I'm going to show you right now. Also, I like how I skipped over the whole like showing you what the card does part. Did it for crop rotation, didn't do it for any of them else. So we have Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings. It says, whenever a non-token creature you control enters the battlefield, you make a food token. Then we have Cauldron Familiar. Cauldron Familiar, 1 mana, 1/1. When it ETBs, you drain your opponent for 1, and you can sack a food to return to play. So we have Samwise Cauldron Familiar, and then a sack outlet. Let's go with Carrion Feeder, because it's a 1 mana sack outlet. 1 mana, 1/1, sack creature, put a 1/1 counter on it. So with Carrion Feeder, Samwise, and Cauldron Familiar, you cast Flash, put the Hulk into play. Hulk dies, you get 6 total mana value of cards, and we've slotted up 4. So Samwise, Cauldron, and Carrion Feeder all come into play. You make Samwise sees the other 2 coming into play and make some food tokens. You then sacrifice Cauldron Familiar to Carrion Feeder, and then sack a food to return Cauldron Familiar to play, which Samwise then makes another food token. So this generates a loop where you can infinitely just drain your opponent. Where this really goes above and beyond is Grand Abolisher, because this is only 4. The Cat, the Sack Outlet, and the Hobbit are all 4 mana together, which means we have 2 extra mana to work with. We get Grand Abolisher. 2 mana, 2/2. During your turn, opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So this means that your opponent just can't do anything. However, this does have an added little bonus of this is only during your turn. So if you go for the Flash combo on their turn, then you don't have the protection from this card. But you can also throw in Sylvan Safekeeper, a 1 mana 1/1 from Judgment that's a sack of land, target creature gains Shroud until end of turn, which helps protect you, and Gingerbrute. Gingerbrute being a 1 mana 1/1 that is also a food token already. So it's a thing that just keeps you alive and protected against some of the other pieces of hate that your opponent might have, or if you want to do it like on their turn. So there's a bunch of stuff, right? All these things together have really pushed the Flash archetype, even though I'm more of I'm a fan of the Ruination Rioter here. Where is it? I like this kill too, but we're not going to get into this kill. I just want to talk about this kill. Well, here's the thing, is that the deck itself, so the Flash combo deck is good, but it's not the best combo deck in the world. This also ties into like the purpose of the points list and the information that it is relaying, which I'll get to in a second, because the last line kind of summarizes it, and then I'll do the big one. The council believes that increasing the points on Flash will lead to a much more leveled playing field alongside other 7-pointed combo control icons, Time Vault and Thassa's Oracle. So, and this got brought up in the Highlander Discord, where somebody was talking about how they we're curious if the council's opinion was that Time Vault is the weakest of the group. And I don't think you can approach these three as it being weak, like which one's the strongest, which one's the weakest, because they're all different. They do different things. They are combo control shells or combo pieces A plus B that can fit into other shells, but they all do things differently, have different strengths and different points of resilience, right? And Flash at 5 was much better than these two and a bit too good, like overall, for like, it was a bit too easy to kind of just stumble into doing it, right? It didn't make for great gameplay. It didn't make for great, didn't make for great gameplay. Didn't make for a consistent kind of outlook for the points list itself, or consistent expectations on like, what does a 7-point card look like? What does a 5-point card look like? That sort of thing. And at 7 points on an even playing field here, you've got options, right? Is any one stronger than the other one? It's hard to say. Time Vault operates on a different level than Thoracle. Thoracle, you get to play different pointed cards that help you set up your combo in a very specific way that has some other resiliency in getting it back from the graveyard using reanimation cards and whatnot. Flash has the instant speed factor and the protection factor, even though your overall pieces are plentiful and vulnerable. And then Time Vault has the resiliency of you can stagger out how you play your pieces. You can throw it into other shells. You can bring them back through recommission and reconstruction and all that. So they're different. So putting Flash up to 7 points it's still a very powerful deck, right? We still have Mystical Tutor at 1. We got Merchant Scroll. Like, you could rock the like Flash, Mystical Tutor, Merchant Scroll, and then whatever you want for your last point. You could play Dig Through Time, you could play Intuition, you could play Imperial Seal. You could play Mana Drain. Whatever your heart desires, you could play it, right? That's pretty strong. But it's not where we were at before, Would Flash being 5 points, Hulk being 2 points be an alternate solution for those who use Flash for other strategies? No. We actually had that approach like half a decade ago, or longer than that. That is a way you can approach these changes, but it is not in my opinion, and the opinion of the councils at the time, that is not an effective way of approaching card combos like that, because one, you're just punishing. While this argument says like now Flash can be used for people that aren't playing it with Hulk, but then you're punishing people for playing Hulk in like relatively fair creature combo lists. When I say fair creature combo, what I mean is like you're still doing Sandy B shenanigans or like Bubble Hulk shenanigans, but those decks are bad. Like, they're already not great. They're already struggling, and putting additional points on them is for the sake of like maybe letting somebody Flash Rector or Flash Nyxbloom, like we would rather take the approach of being like, this card is this points and the other cards at this point all do very similar things, but you get to like approach it from a different aspect with different strengths. And if you want to do something goofy with it, you can, but we would rather keep a cleaner, slimmer points list. Bubble Hulk, well, stuff like, I guess the part of Bubble Hulk I'm talking about is like Hulk combo, but you're using reanimation spells as a way of cheating it into play, and like body double stuff. Rebel Arc, yeah. That kind of stuff. Additionally, on top of all of this, we did some other voting. We did some other discussions. And the results from those votes are here. We talked about Birthing Pod going to 0. That resulted in a 3-2 split. Both myself and Evan said no. Robin, Sasha, and Spencer said yes. So for these, I can only give my take on these and why this is the avenue that we went. I can't speak necessarily for the details of other that drove other counselors to vote in a certain way. Because I don't know the I mean, I know the grander argument on their side, but I don't know all the minutia from like what drove Sasha to want pod to 0 or whatever. So for pod to 0, I voted no because I don't think there's enough time. It was a thing that got suggested that hasn't really been explored. Pod is still a very powerful card. It's something that when you're removing it from the points list, you kind of want to you want to get the reps in first, right? And so if your argument for this is like nobody's playing pod, we should put pod to 0, it's like, well, we should try playing pod at 1 first, and then we can put pod to 0. So I'm not entirely against pod to 0 as a whole. I just don't want to rush into this because 1 point is already a pretty low cost of inclusion, and it's not actually impacting the spreads of these kind of decks that much, except for something like Seeker Walk, right? But that's okay. I'm okay with Seeker Walk being kind of in line with Flash Hawk, Time Vault, and whatnot. Strip. So there was a vote to put Strip to 2. I voted no, Evan voted no, Robin voted no, Sasha and Spencer voted yes. So went 2-3 for yes to no, didn't pass. The discussion with Strip was one that came about with also discussing some cards that weren't voted on, such as Ren and 6, which we discussed Ren and 6, but we didn't vote for Ren and 6. Obviously, Strip is a dangerous card to talk about lowering when we're also lowering crop rotation, and that's a part of what I wanted to approach this as, is that like, is the format made a better place if more people are getting stripped out? The answer is probably no, but also, you know, throwing a bone to some more aggressive decks or 2-color decks to try and disrupt the mana bases of some of the 4-color variants, like, yeah, that's, you know, an admirable goal, I guess. But I would rather have a longer discussion with this card when it is not on a vote with crop rotation that was as unanimous and clean cut. Like, this is a card I want to discuss more with Ren and 6 going up, instead of just going down. Ancient Tomb to 1. Voted 1-4. We all said, myself, Evan, Robin, and Sasha all said no. Spencer said yes. This is one that I personally mentioned offhand as like, I know people are talking about Ancient Tomb to 1. I could, you know, think about Ancient Tomb going to 1 here, all that. And then it really got picked up. There was a lot of conversation about Ancient Tomb to 1. And that's part of why a lot of these changes took so long, is that we were churning over Ancient Tomb, and people were excited for Tomb to 1. People were then kind of not wanting Tomb to 1. And Evan plays a lot of Ancient Tomb, admittedly, in 4-color Initiative, 4-color Blood, Palcatraz, the Academy ramp decks. Like, guy's tapped an Ancient Tomb once or twice in his life. I personally don't think pointing Ancient Tomb is the way to go. I think pointing Ancient Tomb is it takes points into... First off, there's not like a great comparison of like, why is Ancient Tomb 1 point here? Like, what does this say about this card's placement among other 1-point cards? Is it as like, because this card's not Mana Vault, right? And like, is the power level of this card just like an okay thing for certain monocolor or 2-color decks to play? Or if the greedier mana based cards of the 4-color, 5-color decks like Academy decks and Initiative decks are playing this card, like, is the cost of inclusion, even when it's free, still relevant? And the answer is like, yes. That's my take, is that like, I don't like this card as a 1-point card. I think it sees a reasonable amount of play, but there's also a decision on whether to play it. And there is a genuine cost of inclusion in the more degenerate versions of archetypes that want to play this card. Minsk and Boo Timeless Heroes to 1. 05, we all said no. I actually brought this up. I was the one that said, hey, let's talk about Minsk and Boo to going to 1, because this is something that there are some community members that are kind of passionate about. There are some both locally and on the Discord. And I know that there is I'm trying to say this in a way that doesn't come off as rude, because I think that personally, I have taken more of an approach to, well, if enough people are talking about it, even if it seems a little goofy, we should look at this seriously, right? I don't think it's very helpful to be in the position that we are as counselors to just kind of roll our eyes when this kind of thing is suggested, because also this card is fucked up. I was the one that initially was like, hey, this card will never be a point, to bring it to be the council and be like, let's talk about a world where Minsk and Boo is 1 point, because this card is very clearly just a bit better than every other thing at this category, at this level. And then ultimately, after months of discussion, it got to the point of like, nah, this is fine. It's a 4-drop. It's busted. But also, we are the format of busted cards, right? That's a part of the appeal. No shade on the 7-point format, the Auslander, but we don't want to go down the path of pointing cards like Minsk and Boo or Murktide Regent or Snapcaster Mage. I mean, some of those are more extreme than others, and obviously a product of being 60 card plus sideboard, but we don't want to do that. And think Minsk and Boo is Minsk and Boo to 1 would be a decision that would be reflecting that kind of format. Underworld Breach to 4. This was voted 1 to 4. Myself, Evan, Robin, and Sasha all said no. Spencer said yes. Spencer just hates combo. I'm saying this half jokingly. Yeah. Breach at 3, very powerful, but Breach at 4 just kind of removes the Breach deck from the format, and we're a Black Lotus format. Let's give people a reason to play a Black Lotus. Let's give, like, that's cool. That's appealing. That helps create, like, for folks in chat who don't play Vintage, do you ever find yourself going to like Goldfish and looking at Vintage lists and just going like, holy shit, right? Like looking at these decks, looking at like a mono red deck that's playing like all 5 Moxen, you're like, what the fuck? That's so wild, right? That shit's cool, right? Not saying that that's the driving factor behind this decision, but that is an aspect of Canadian Highlander that should be embraced sometimes, where it's appealing to see people do broken things with broken cards and to do so at a proficiency and a level that is admirable, right? And so Breach, pretty good deck, does have some weaknesses, does have some vulnerabilities. Players are adapting to that. They're understanding like how to attack the Breach deck. Is it still one of the best decks in the format? Absolutely. But that's okay. It's okay for combo to be good. It's okay for combo decks to be in the top like 10. They'll always be good. They'll always be some of the best decks in the format. They'll always have different ways to attack them. And if they're too good, well, then we point them, but not now. And then additionally, some cards that were discussed but not voted on. Natural Order and Tinker got brought up. These cards were talked about as like, hey, we're looking at, talking about the Gaia's Cradle decks or talking about the 2-color green X decks and all that stuff. And being like, hey, Natural Order also fits into these, and Hoof is pretty bad right now. Like, is there a world where this card becomes a 2-pointer? And we took a direction that like reducing crop rotation or reducing price of progress to maybe get people to encourage people to try Natural Order in their 2-color decks. So you can go Mox NO, or you could do like Ring NO plus whatever you want. Natural Order is a really good Magic card at 3 points. You should be playing it. Chances are you should be playing it over some of your Moxen too. Like a 3-color deck with green in it should be playing like Mox NO and then whatever. Tinker. Another card where, we had this conversation with Transmute Artifact and crop rotation. We don't really need to throw another bone to these Tinker decks. I was personally against Tinker. I think Tinker at 3 is great, underexplored, very powerful. Yeah, it's fucked. Tinker's really good. It's just people, they need to like recalibrate their brain. Like this sounds very like, dude, you gotta understand, man, it's all about this. But Tinker It's not about the blight steal, dude. It's not about the blight steal. It's about tinkering for Gilded Lotus. Or like, you know what your best tinker target is? Whatever the fuck you need. I've been tinkering for the One Ring so much. Tinker for One Ring, for Portal to Phyrexia, Paradox Engine. I tinkered for Sensei's Divining Top recently. Tinkered for Rings of Brighthearth. Like, it's so powerful, so flexible, and is one of the cards that I think deserves the most exploration. And then finally, Renin 6. I've turned from Minskin Buddha 1 over to Renin 6 to 1. I like the idea of Renin 6 to 1 now. Because triomes. We had this discussion when this pops up anytime someone's like, do you ever think a Planeswalker would hit the points list? And the conversation was, Oko's the best Planeswalker in the format, and I can't see Oko on the points list, which is a bad way of approaching things. And I thankfully, I can happily say that I think I've evolved and I've grown in terms of like evaluation and in what cards provide and power levels and the purpose of ban lists and points lists, because I don't think that's a good way of approaching it. My thought for Renin 6 to 1 is that it's a card that punishes already. Like, it's just such a brutal snowbally card, makes your mana just fucking irrelevant. So good with Triumph, so good with channel lands. Is just like, it facilitates so many degenerate strategies, and like on curve it's pretty disgusting, like damn near unwinnable at times, but then like this card is still just brutal late game, right? If you draw it late game in like the 4-color mirror, you are now up cards. You now get to start cycling Triumphs. You get to rebuy fetches to make your, to set up Mystic Sanctuaries. Like, it's so fucking good, right? Renin 6, I think the issue is that a lot of conversations about Renin 6 were always tied to either Oko or Strip or Urza Saga or Minskin, those kind of cards. When Renin 6 is actually just closer to something like Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time. It's wild. Like, I guess obviously it's good with those cards. It's good with Strip. It's good with Urza Saga. But it is closer to something like Treasure Cruise. It's like the Fire Ice of Treasure Cruise, Yeah, it's gross. And I think I'm going to be like, I might change my take on this, who knows? But right now I'm in the mindset of like, yeah, actually I could jive with Renin 6 to 1. But we didn't vote on it because, again, these things take time. I know people are really, points on Canlander cards, especially cards going from 0 to 1, are so funny, because so much of it is based on like, what did I get my ass kicked by? And you can't do that. You can't make decisions after you get your ass kicked by something. You have to make the decisions after you have kicked somebody's ass with it, right? Like, you gotta be like, wow, I shouldn't have been able to do that, instead of they shouldn't have been able to do that, which is tough. That shit takes time. Takes time, takes some perspective, takes patience, and you got to do it all while dealing with people DMing you on the regular. So yeah, these are the changes. Overall, pretty good changes. And I hope that this in particular, talking about the cards we did vote on but did not successfully get passed, or cards that we talked about, helps kind of push for more transparency when it comes to the council interacting with the community, and then, much like previous ones, there is going to be a video on Loading Ready Run that gets put out, much like how I did one with Robin for the last points announcement. This one, Robin is out of town. This next one is going to be myself and Sasha, as a way of introducing who Sasha is, as a counselor, as a Canlander player, and then talking about the things. So hopefully for future points changes as well, we can incorporate more council members on these kind of like, hey everybody, Canlander check-in, what up? And yeah. Any questions, comments, concerns, any other insight that folks are looking to before we start drafting? Also, Kyle's, apologies for the wait. I got on a roll. Welcome back for the 3rd year. 3 years. Very happy to get back into a schedule where I can catch the rodeo live. Well, thank you for the support. That is a long ass time. Glad to have you and good to see you. Thank you for the support. Thank you to Elf Lawyer for gifting a sub to Kelvin. Very kind of you. Thank you so much. Steely Dan fan Steely Dan fan 69420, possibly my new favorite username. We had a giggle yesterday. Gifted 5 subs to the community. Holy smokes. To Tay Sakura, Undead Dragon, Colin Luab, Dyslexic Nerd, and Quarthian. That's very kind of you. They should collab with more rappers. Yeah. Steely Dan fan 69420. I don't know if you overheard Kiefer say it, but Kiefer one time after having an evening smoke came in, opened my door and just said, you know, Steely Dan should collaborate with more rappers, and then just left. And Ostritz, back for the 42nd month. Hey, Wheeler, love the Friday Night Paper Fight VOD. I didn't know you had a pitch perfect Smork impression. Did I do the like Migo face like that one? I'd have to listen to it again. I haven't heard the like Smork song. Haven't heard the Smork song in a hot minute. How do I feel about Planeswalkers getting put onto the points list? Again, like I like Red and 6. I think Planeswalkers should be approached based on the card and not the, you know, and not the whatchamacallit, like just as a type. Any opinions on Mystical Tutor at 1? Seems like a 1.5 card, really good at 1, really bad at 2. Yeah, basically. There are a lot of half-point cards. Moxen are a classic half-point card too, that got brought up, where people are like, I can't believe Mox are only 3 points. I forget where I saw it, where it's like, yeah, but we don't want to introduce a Mox tax. And I think Moxen at 3 points end up doing more for the format, more good for the format than, you know, just kind of being a thing only for monocolored decks. Also, just like if people are using their points on Moxen, then that means that what they are doing is just something every deck can do. It's just occasionally at a bit of a quicker pace, which is very good, very powerful. Obviously, it's a like strong way to approach deck building, but it's not the end of the world, you know? Yeah, powerful stuff should be powerful. Isn't that sick? Isn't it so cool that you could just like you play dog shit cards off of Moxen? Like that's such a cool part of the format, right? Like me casting, I don't know. I think it's pretty cool that you get scenarios like this. Like every time there's a North 100 showdown, or I show a screenshot on on Twitter or whatever of like Gaia Skyfolk next to like Tropical Island Mox Sapphire. Like that's cool. That's good. But to answer for Mystical, yeah, I think it's better at 1 than 2 because it at least sees play at 1. And there's still room to explore with that. And there are other, like Mystical at 1, if it becomes a problem, there are other cards associated to it that we can change to make it less of a problem and still let the people casting Mystical Tutor find Price of Progress or Retreat the Angels or Terminus or Tinker or whatever, you know, do their stuff. Any off-the-wall ideas about the initiative in general, like putting them in the same spot as anti-cards? No, we're trying to keep Canadian Highlander as official as possible, as in line with vintage as possible. And we don't want to, you know, just say like, no, you're not allowed to play this, you're not allowed to have this. That's just not something we want to approach. We don't like complex, I'm going to use the word ban, but they're not bans. We don't like complex bans. And also the initiative isn't as good as you think it is. That's it. Those are the big ones. The initiative isn't as good as you think it is. You just need to try playing more combo. You need more combo in your life. You need more aggression in your life. And the initiative ends up getting bloated in its appearance and in its perceived effect on the format because it's a very appealing thing to latch on to, right? It's new, it's mid-range, it's multicolored, it's annoying, it's value. People love it, right? People love it. Can I like the Canlander Discord? Absolutely. Also, just like, what do you do for the initiative, right? Like, you could say pointing White Plume because it's the fastest, but it's not the best. It's not the best initiative creature, you know? Which in itself is an interesting conversation to have, because do you point the best one or do you point the one that would send the message and the one that sticks out? But even then, it's just, you're not really doing anything. It's a change that says like, hey, your Jeskai deck or your Esper deck or your 4-color deck doesn't get to play White Plume anymore. And it's like, oh, okay. Then it just ends up seeing, it either sees 0 play or just like sees like a little bit of play. It ends up punishing like Death and Taxes and like White X mid-range decks. It's a weird one to approach. Is Corruption to Ancient Tomb Academy potentially the more profitable home for a card than a Lance deck or Cradle deck? No, it goes in all the different decks. Corruption into Ancient Tomb is you're not. That's a 0-point play right there. Following your great comment from the last Friday Night Paper Fight about Australian Highlander, what do I think the difference is? Philosophy between Auslander and Canlander? Feel the difference, limited deck size and sideboard differences. I think that the difference, I mean, sideboards and deck size are huge, right? They dictate everything from deck construction to play patterns to how you ingest the gameplay, and I guess the deck building too, right? Because you're going to be seeing the same cards over and over and over again. And if the Australians taking the avenue of like, now I'm not going to do an impression. Here, I'll pull up the Aussie points list. I don't want to make this a, I want to be very clear. This is not me saying that that this is stupid and bad and I don't know anything, right? Like, I'm not hating here. This is the Aussies points list is a product of the format and of like how players, like what happens when you play 60 card singleton over and over again, right? Like look at some of these cards that are on here at 1 point. So they have 7 points. That's why it's called 7 point, which I'm trying to do instead of calling it Auslander. But look at some, like Comet, Deathrite Shaman, Dreadhorde Arcanist, Green Sun Zenith, Gush, Murktide Regent, Profane Tutor, CZDZ, Top, Snapcaster Mage, One Ring, Renin 6. I mean, Renin 6 is a different one. White Plume. Obviously, Luris. They have Luris at 3 points. They have Lutri at 2 points, but they're only pointed as companions. You got Ragavan, Uro, like a bunch of these cards that are just good stuff cards. And when you play 60 cards, if 20% of that is going to be, or not 20%, if like 30% of that is going to be mana, right? You're probably just running into the same cards over and over again. This popped up on that Friday Night Paper Fight when I played the Beans deck, and like Jeskai Green or Jeskai Bean, where Alex, Ben, and Nelson all commented on me seeing the same cards, like, wow, how many Force of Wills do you have, or whatever. Because that deck churns through so many cards, and it does so not just through raw card advantage, but also through selection. So naturally, if I'm drawing a bunch of cards and using my selective cards to find my best cards, my Force of Will, my Fury, my Swords to Plowshares, whatever, they're going to appear as though they pop up with increased frequency. That is just an issue of the card quality and card advantage that is abundant in modern Magic, and imagine that in 60 card. Like, yeah, you're going to be dying to the same Uro over and over again, or Murktide Regent, or Ragavan, or Oko, or whatever. So, like, that makes a bit more sense, right? Yeah, it's interesting. I hold no ire towards the Australians or the Europeans. I think that it's stupid to pit Highlander communities and Singleton communities against each other, because at the end of the day, we're all doing it for the same reason. And yeah, if anything, this is I don't look at this points list and go, haha, look at them, they still have Enlightened Tutor as a point, they're so stupid, look what I could do, look what I could do. Like, I'm not doing that. I look at it with like a, wow, huh, Oko at 2, Ragavan at 2, fuck, that must be bad, huh? You know, like, I look at it assuming these players and these council members for their format are doing the correct thing, right? That should be the way that we should operate, is not look at something going, man, I could do it better. It's just like, no, I'm going to look at this and assume that these people that dedicate so much time and energy and that have been playing this for like 2 decades, look at this and go like, okay, yeah, cool. All right, sure, it works for them. Oh, I'm familiar about the reserve list accessibility rule. There are certain things that I don't really agree with. I don't like the pointed as companion. I think that's, you know, pointed as companion and the reserve list thing. I think those are more, they increase complexity issues in something that's already very complex, but that's different. That's me liking things a lot cleaner, you know? Lornan Bridges, welcome back for the full year. Hope you're doing well, and if not, please do better. I'm doing okay. My sinuses are a little stuffed, but I'm good. Anything else? Anything else? What do we have? What do we have? Angel Stompy, splash another color? No, just play mono white. I mean, I think we're good. If anybody has any other questions, now is the time to ask. The reserve list accessibility rule for 7-point is that if your deck has no reserve list cards, you get an extra point, which is a admirable goal, but I don't think it actually achieves anything and just makes it a little more complex. And it also just punishes you for weird things. Like, my Mwanvuli Ooze means that I can't play 8 points or whatever. Oh, I'm not drinking Mio right now. I'm on Rooibos tea. Thoughts on a wishboard and Canlander? Hate it. Hate it, hate it, hate it. Wishboards don't exist. They're not a real thing. They're not present in Vintage, meaning that they won't be present in Canlander. I think Canlander should have a sideboard. I think that Canadian Highlander should have a sideboard, and that there should be 2 types of events that you play. One with sideboard, one without sideboard. I do not like the idea of a wishboard. I do not like any kind of like weird, like Mox tax, or this card can't be played with that card, or additional points because you helped an old lady across the street. Like, I think it should be cut and dry. Again, these formats are phenomenal, and there's already accessibility issues when you look at the cost of the cards or the availability of the cards, on top of the complexity issues that come with deck building and gameplay, right? And so sideboards do increase complexity a little bit, but they do so in a familiar way. They do so in a way that is consistent throughout other sanctioned forms of Magic, and in a way that new players to the format are going to be like, oh yeah, okay, well I played with sideboards. I get it, you know? Thoughts on Gladiator sideboard? Would love a sideboard in Gladiator. Don't think it's happening. I think same thing. I like sideboards. Sideboards are cool. You mention sideboards and people immediately, their head goes to choke. Like, they're just like, nuh-uh, I'm not playing sideboards. It's going to be all copies of Choke and copies of Stony Silence, and that's not what it's going to be like. Because if you bring in the Stony Silence against the Artifact deck, you're going to get your ass kicked by Kappa Cannoneer. Like, if you bring in the Shatterstorm against the Artifact deck, you're going to get your ass kicked by Oko, or just like Tezzeret, like rebuilding. Like they're just, it's more than that, right? Sideboards are great. They're skill testing. They allow for more expression in deck building, more diversity in deck building. They allow for a player to, I mean, when I say expression, I mean like they allow for someone who fucking hates goblins to just include Tividar's Crusade. Oh, how do I spell it? Is Tividar? Oh, Tividar's Crusade I don't think is on. Are you on Magic Online? Oh, it is. Yeah, they allow someone who just fucking hates goblins to include Tividar's Crusade, Tividar of the Thorn, Foothill Guide, like all these cards that just shit on goblins, and that's cool. That is cool. It's not realistic. It's not what would happen, but it's very cool. If you added sideboards, of course, you would have to add additional points to certain companions and to Karn, right? Karn the Great Creator would be a big one. But yeah, like think about it. When you think about me as a Magic player, think of what's the first thing that comes to your mind, right? It's probably something about artifacts and probably about artifact combo. Like, I'm the person, Egg, right? And then when you think about sideboard cards, what do you think about? Like, as far as the kind of shit that would run around in sideboards. Cards like Karn, which shits on Egg. Cards like Stony Silence, that mucks Egg, Rules of Law. All these kind of cards that theoretically should be really brutal for me, the Egg player, the artifact player, that doesn't want to see them around. But I don't think that's true. And the only way we find out is by giving it a shot. I would like to see more testing for Canlander sideboards. Don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately, as a whole, but I would like to see it happen. Yeah, oof. Good. Punish me. Do something. Anything. Anyways, thanks for listening, folks. There is a second part of the stream where I am now going to play Cube. If that's all right with you. I mean, we could just turn this into an entire stream where I just talk Canlander. It's just going to be a Canlander sit and chat. I am a little worried about my voice. What do I think about the overrepresentation of Jeskai X decks in the tournament results? Well, Jeskai and Jeskai Green are the best. It's the best deck in the format, right? And it's the best deck in the format. It plays the best colors in the game, and it is not difficult to pilot. On like a very like level one, like level one piloting the deck, not too difficult. And then you put it into the hands of a skilled player or a player that has a lot of reps with this style of deck, and they're going to pick people apart because their deck is like, I'm not going to take a game action until you take a game action. Then I'm going to invalidate what you have done entirely at a lower cost of commitment until I want to take a game action. And then the game action I'm taking is with a design mistake. Right? So like, if you look at these Jeskai decks and Jeskai Green, they're all decks that are the best removal spells, counter spells, card draw selection of all time, that all trade up in either mana or tempo, and then design mistakes that put your opponent in a position where they can't trade up or can't trade in a way that gets them plus tempo, right? Oko, Minskenboo, White Plume Adventurer, Monastery Mentor, Dreadhorde. I mean, Dreadhorde Arcanist is a bit different. Snapcaster Mage. You know, pretty brutal magic cards. Even Tarmogoyf, right? So yeah, it's a good deck. It plays, its level 1 play is pretty easy to pilot. It has a high ceiling for learning when to, you know, actually sequence and place your cards. And it plays the best cards. And the way that you beat or tackle this deck is through means and archetypes that players that the most vocal style of Magic players do not like to play, right? Like, it's admittedly, if you're not playing with proxies, telling someone like sleeve up a Black Lotus deck, sleeve up a Mishra's Workshop deck, play Thoracle, play Flash Hulk, you know, these kind of things. They don't, that's not what people like to hear. And like, it's maybe not the most fruitful thing to even say. Not that anybody does that. I mean, I did it earlier, but it's more complex than that. Yeah, it's just like, they're like, no, I want to keep playing exactly what I'm playing without making adjustments for this matchup, because I don't like this deck. And it's a big ask to get people to change or get people to try something new, or, you know, the bunch of issues that pop up, right? So it's tough. It's tough. And then, yeah, like Kelvin's saying, pointing Jeskai is also awkward. Like, there are certain cards that you can point, Brendan 6, that can be a little helpful. There are cards that there are changes that you can make to the points list. Like, every change we made, except for the Flash one, but all three of those reductions help fight Jeskai, right? Price of Progress, pretty good against Jeskai and Jeskai Green. Crop Rotation gives some extra love to those decks in general, but also gives some love to, the Academy decks that have a reasonable matchup against Jeskai. Transmute Artifact, again, kind of a stinker, but pushes some of the artifact decks that can outgrind Jeskai or have a reasonable Jeskai match, you know? April Mox, welcome back for the 6th month. What up? How you doing? How you been? Thank you so much for all the support. And Valhallan Melta for the 6th month. So I have to see price unpointed. Maybe there will finally be a cost to 4 mana bases. I'm so hyped to just 20 someone. Yeah, that'll feel great. I'm excited for you. Just don't do it to me, please. It is all play in the monthly, and besides combo decks like Flash Hulk, the matchup feel unfair for the OP. Huh? Like, I know there are a lot of Jeskai Green decks getting played. Here's another thing, is that, like, it's the kind of deck that is appealing to a very specific type of Magic player, and that type of Magic player is also often one of the best or better players in the room, you know? Like, it's a blue deck with removal and powerful cards, an incremental advantage that can be accrued by fetching properly, sequencing spells properly, outplaying my opponent, right? So it's a good archetype that attracts the best kind of players in the game to play as tightly as possible, which is going to make it shine. And Comet's there too. Ooh, a Jersey scene? Time to go back to Jersey. Can somebody link an example of Jeskai Green? Sure, I'll show you my Jeskai Beans list. This isn't the perfect Jeskai Green list, but I think it's pretty strong. There are some cards that I've included based off of personal preference and also trying to get the beans to really shine, but you could bring this to any event and take it down easily. There are also some cards in here that, like, if I was playing, like, for money, would I play Omnath in this deck? Probably not. Am I playing on camera and do I want to avoid people asking about Omnath? Yeah. Should I be playing Teferi Hero Dominaria? Probably not. Does it work with beans? Yeah. I think I'm sold on beans. I think there is I wouldn't say play it in every single build, but, you know. Shock didn't have Brazen Bar or Vanillion Clique, trying to invalidate opponent's removal and kill them through concession. Any other Canlander questions, comments, concerns? We should get like a giant like Canlander discussion hour. Where's the sticky note? Canadian Highlander talk show with Wheeler and Chad. There we go. Great. What deck do I personally want more tools for? The equipment deck. I genuinely think that Boros equipment is pretty close to being like a reasonable mid-range deck. Oh, we'll do cube. Don't worry. I'll actually play cube. I'm just, you know, we'll get some. We have people here that want to talk. I want to talk about this too. I don't get time to talk about all this as much as I'd like to, anyways. Soul Cauldron decks, not Soul Cauldron combo, although I've thought about it a bit, but there's some neat things you could do with Soul Cauldron and Urza that I'd be interested in looking at. Yeah. Wheeler, how do you feel about free spells possibly getting a point, Force of Will, Fury, etc.? We talked, I mean, Force of Will used to be a point. If any free spell is getting pointed, Force of Will would be the point. I don't think we're going to see Force of Will get a point because it's, well, it's card disadvantage. I mean, it's tempo advantage for sure. It's a powerful magic card. Force Will is kind of fucked, but I don't think pointing Force Will really matches what we're trying to do for the format and envision for the format. Certainly not something like Fury. Yeah, that's too far gone. If I could rename Canlander, what would I want to call it? I've been thinking about this for like a decade. I do think that Canadian Highlander needs a new name. I think it needs a new name. If it's ever to hit a higher level of getting people into the format, getting mentions by Wizards of the Coast, all that stuff, it needs a new name. And I don't think that new name needs to be that much. Like Centurion we talked about. Yeah, that was going to be Gladiator's name as well. That was a thing. Centurion came out from a conversation where somebody's going to make a joke. Oh, it came out. Haha. Centurion came about from a conversation when Gladiator was invented about what we should name Gladiator. And Centurion was a name that was passed around for like, well, that's what we can call Canlander. But it wasn't getting used. And then we ended up coming into Gladiator. I think honestly you could just call it Canlander. Yeah, the Highlander part is a little awkward. And the Canadian part is a little awkward. The whole name is dog shit, frankly. Like, so this is too regional. Canadian Highlander's too regional. You don't want it to be that. This doesn't make sense. The format is global. It's worldwide. We don't need this anymore. And then this is copyright. And it's a little too specific. Gladiator is general enough that it gets around some issues. Highlander, too specific, at least to the lawyers that I spoke to. So there's a couple of ways you can approach this. You can pick a real world word. You can pick one to say, you can pick one that is like somewhat descriptive of the format and the quality of the format, something along the lines of like vintage, right? And I wonder if I can find the conversations I had with Robin surrounding this. Because Robin and I threw around some names at each other. Name. $29 results. True name to 0. Oh, yeah, okay. We were talking about it here. Changing the name of the format, blah, blah, blah. Rename it. Highlanders to regional. So here were some names that we talked about. Jokingly, Superior. Although Superior has a couple of issues. 1, too full of itself. Here, let's do this. Superior. Pros. Canadian. Format equals the best. Real word. Catchy and funny, tongue in cheek, right? So superior as the name has some pros to it, right? It's a single word. It is vaguely Canadian in regards to Lake Superior, one of the Great Lakes. Format equals the best. We get to say that it's the best format. It's superior, right? Like that sounds great. It's a real word. It's not a portmanteau. It's not something that is directly pulled from Magic or elsewhere. It's a word. It's catchy and funny. It's very funny in a tongue-in-cheek way to be like, oh, what format are we playing? Superior. You know? That's cool. That's funny. That's charming, right? Cons. Shitty bigots. A little too tongue-in-cheek. Huh? Why? Couple of issues with this. One, shitty bigots. Superior and supremacy is something that holds a little, it's a little awkward to be using this as like, this is what we're calling our thing in 2023. It's subjective, but for naming purposes, you imagine that it isn't, right? Again, you walk the walk and you talk the talk, even though of course it is subjective. There are people that don't like Canlander, that don't like playing this kind of Magic. They think draft is better, they think commander is better, whatever. But that's not something you should take into consideration if you're going down the route of being loud and proud. But pride also, I mean, yeah, there's a bit of a, it's a bit of an issue. And yeah, it ties into, that's another one, elitism, Black Lotus format. We're a format with Power 9. Power 9, dual lands, expensive shit. We already have issues with getting people into the format off of the price barrier, off of like, even though they could play without Power 9, they could play with proxies, bunch of different things. This is a little too tongue-in-cheek and sounds a little too smarmy, and ends up being like a, we don't want the format to be like a class check, you know, like, oh, which tax bracket are you in? Don't want that. Then, huh? Why? It's just like, you want to play superior? What are you talking about? Superior. It's a format. Why is it called superior? Huh? Oh, because it's better than everything. Like, it's just the conversations that are brought from it are not great. And yeah, it doesn't mean anything to people that are either not into the game or very new to the game. Singleton is already kind of used. Singleton would be great. Pros. It's Singleton. It's already Magic. It's descriptive. It's a real word. Cons. It's boring. It's used already. Singleton what? Oh, like Commander. Singleton. Pros for Singleton as a name. It's Singleton. We're playing Singleton. Well, what is Singleton? Well, it means you use one copy of any given card. Great. So it's descriptive, right? It tells you what it is. It reflects what the format is, and then it plays by those rules. It's already Magic. Singleton is already in the Magic player vernacular, in the lexicon of Magic players. And so they will be able to latch on quickly to understand what the promise of the format is. And it's a real word that does a lot of heavy lifting. Cons, it's boring. It's a little surgical. It's a little sterile, calling it Singleton, you know? It's already used. people might not know this. Singleton is a format, technically. Let me pull up the Magic Wiki. Singleton is a casual, constructed Magic the Gathering format, and it's a simplified version of Highlander, which is no longer used. And it can be used for standard, modern, legacy, or vintage deck building rules. There was a Singleton format on Magic Online. It has not received, it's basically no longer used. It has not received any updates. And the banned list is Upheaval, GT, Flash, and Skullclamp in 2007. Great. Singleton what? Again, tying into that. Are we talking about Singleton Standard, Singleton Modern, Singleton Vintage? Isn't Vintage already Singleton? If it's Singleton Vintage, what about restricted cards? Bunch of stuff. And then, like Commander. We want to try to not be Commander. That's a part with Highlander and Canlander. They sound a bit too much like Commander, and we don't want people to be like, oh, it's Commander, but without a Commander. It's like, well, no, it's completely different. You're actually trying to kill your opponent, and good players play the format. Where's the other one? This isn't a part of it, but Robin said, I've been building a sweet Commander cube with its own rules called Yawgmoth's Time Storm. Here is a name that I found to be, this is one of my names for the format that I think would be pretty good. This is my pitch for renaming Canlander. Actually, let's talk about Canlander. Pros. Already exists. It's the shorthand we use. It's descriptive, kinda, and cool. History. Magic the Gathering. Cons. Not a real word. Jesus, I'm struggling with that. Clumsy portmanteau. It's cool is genuinely a strong argument, right? So Canlander. What about calling Canadian Highlander just Canlander? Pros. It already exists. People call it Canlander all the time. I make a genuine effort to not call it Canlander when we're on streams or podcasts. I mean, here I'll call it, but in official channels or on tweets, I always call it Canadian Highlander, or I try to, because that's the name of the format. And you want to keep the branding consistent, and people might not know what it is and all that. But it's the shorthand we use. It's the shorthand a lot of players use. It's snappy. It's fast. It's good. It's regionalized, but not in a way that gets people to go like, why would I do that? You know? And yeah, it's descriptive in a way if you're in the know, and it's cool. Again, it's Canlander. It's like a nickname, right? The format is named after this nickname. It's got history. Again, as much as I try to do this and as much as other people try to do this, it's called Canlander. When I did the stream for Weekly MTG with Blake, he called it Canlander, right? It's a thing that even in official channels, people slip up and call it that because it's just what we've been calling it for God knows how long. And then I put Magic Gathering as a bit. Cons. What do you mean? This isn't exactly descriptive about what the format is or what the card pool is, right? Modern, getting less descriptive, you know, as time goes on. But, you know, modern border, right? What is it? What does modern mean? Well, you play with cards that have modern borders originally. You know, vintage. What is vintage? Well, you can assume that it's going to be a bunch of old cards, right? What the fuck is Canlander? 2, it's not a real word. That's a big one. It kind of ties into the but it's just Canlander's not. You can't figure it out. You can't grok Canlander. So even if you're like, what does this mean? You can't like try to dissect it, and an explanation for it doesn't actually describe the format unless you go like, well, it was originally Canadian Highlander, which is Highlander, which is also this, and then it was done by Canadians, and Canada's over here. You know, it's not great. Clumsy portmanteau. It is just a clumsy portmanteau. It's Canlander, Canadian Highlander together, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think Canlander actually has a lot of strengths behind it, and I think that realistically, we're not shooting for the stars here, right? But giving it a name that is easier for it to receive mention and branding and get used in a more official capacity is a goal, right? So I think Canlander is if the format ever receives an official name change, which God, I hope it does, and sooner rather than later, this is what it should be, I imagine. However, I had a thought. Carlifer is the clumsiest portmanteau. Exactly. Why is that? And he thanked me for it. Here is my pitch for a name for Canlander that isn't Canlander. Boundless, which is kind of a funny in-joke if you're from Victoria, BC. I think Boundless is pretty good. Why? Well, a couple of things. Pros. Single word, real word. Sounds good. Descriptive of card pool without pinching. I like it because it's a single word. Single word. Boundless. It's a real word as well, right? It exists. You can find it out. Yeah, 10 points. You're bound by 10 points and 100 card minimum, but you know what I mean. But it's a real word that Webster's defines, or I guess Oxford defines, right? Unlimited or immense, which is pretty descriptive of the card pool, right? Like, yeah, you can play anything. It is huge. Your options are boundless. You can do, because what do we say when we talk about Canlander? You can do whatever the fuck you want. Your options are boundless. They're unlimited. Unlimited is kind of a funny one, but it's too close to, like, is there a draft component because it's related to limited? You know, that kind of thing. So yeah, it sounds good. It's a real word. It's descriptive of the card pool. It's descriptive of what you can achieve when you play it and the promise of the format. And it doesn't pinch on vintage. It's not just going to like thesaurus.com and looking up vintage and being like, what else could we pick here? Because, you know, there's, Lord knows that I did that when I was trying to think of good names for the format, you know? So yeah, it's not, oh, and I mean, we talked about Centurion. Centurion is a little, again, I mean, we could talk about Centurion here. There are some cons to Boundless as well, because, you know, there always will be, but this is me pitching. I'm not going to talk about the bad things. Centurion is pros, real word, cool word, 100. Get it? Bad. Military. Already used. A little confusing if you know what you're talking about. Yeah, Centurion's already used. There's it's used for, what is it? Like dual commander or type of dual commander? Centurion MTG. 1v1 commander. Yeah, dual commander. There you go. Centurion commander. It's a real Centurion. It's a real word. Great. It's a cool word. Yeah, it sounds good. And 100. Get it? If you don't get it, Centurion, the commander of a century in the ancient Roman army. basically, although it's not technically... Centurion is the military unit originally consisting of 100 legionnaires. However, this ties into the part down here is that it was only like 100 legionnaires for a very short amount of time. That was actually just 80 for like most of the Imperial era. It was 80, so it's a little confusing a bit. It's military, and that's bad. We don't want that. You don't want your format tied to anything that is potentially appropriated by anything bigoted or militaristic, and the military is both of that. Already used, we talked about that, and yeah, it's a little confusing. Why not Century? You could play Century. It's a little awkward because you're like, hey, have you played Century? You're like, oh, yeah, I've played Century or Century. Like it's not clear. So it struggles with that. This is not an easy problem to fix, and there are multiple answers to this depending on what your priorities are, or what you're trying to address, or what issues you are looking to, bypass with an upgrade to the name, right? Victorian has been proposed. Robin and I talked about Victorian as well. We could talk about Victorian here. Ties into history, old cards, real word, cons, bad association, a little snooty, not descriptive. Victorian suffers from a lot of the issues that Superior suffers from, as well as Centurion. It's kind of like a hybrid between those two. They really hit the nail on the head with Vintage, where Vintage is like, Victorian, it ties into the history of the format, and obviously kind of like, if you're in the know, it kind of sells the history of the game. Obviously it ties in with the old cards, and it's a real word, but you don't exactly want to associate your format with, child labor and class and racism and, all that stuff. Very snooty, not super descriptive. Emperor is already used. Antique makes it sound too old. There was a good one. Shit, I just had a good one. Something in chat sparked my memory of an older one that we used, that was pitched. Why can't I remember it? Yeah, I think look, I've been thinking about this for like a decade, right? And Boundless is the one that has popped up that feels the most like, yeah, this is good. I think Boundless is good. Ancestral's not bad. Ancestral is a little it's a little grand and a bit too it's a hard one, because like in its most sterile form it is very grand, and then it can dip into being slightly appropriative, Heritage is a good one, but also suffers from some issues. Haymaker. Yeah, I've been thinking about Boundless for a while. I would like to, if I am making a pitch like for changing the format, Boundless, having explained the bounds, yeah. I mean, when you hear Vintage, you don't like have to be like, oh, and you can use new cards as well, right? Like Vintage also suffers from being like, well, so I can only use old cards? I can only use cards that are vintage cards, right? It's like, well, no. In fact, you're going to need the brand new cards in order to compete. Yeah, it's tough, right? It's tough. Timeless is a good one. Eternal is already, yeah, eternal is common use. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot. Magic base fossil. Boomer magic. Where I had, God, where was it? I had, oh, this is gonna kill me because I had the thought of a good one. And I was like, ooh, there we go. I want that. That's what we should call it. That's something we could like workshop on. But I can't find it now. Old-timey or French words for singular or 100. Oh. That was another one that I jokingly thought. Premiere. I think Premiere might be kind of funny. Premiere is very in line with Superior, but it is less boastful. It is, I mean, it's still boasting, but you know, it is a bit. Premiere suffers from a couple of things. So let's talk about Premiere. So pros. Real word ties to memes of format. Clean, catchy. Sounds good. Canadian. Vaguely. Boastful, but not in a bad way. Cons. Premiere? Non-descriptive of form. Okay, so Premiere. It's a real word. Bunch of extra points for that. It ties to, obviously, some memes of the format where, not saying that this is a driving force behind any change that should be made. I gotta be clear. Even though I am one of the individuals involved in this, this is a two-sided coin. One, loading ready run, Canadian High and like North 100 Showdown and North 100 and all that has done a huge amount of getting more people to play Canadian Highlander, right? That's just a fact. I imagine there are a lot of people in chat right now that would not know what Canadian Highlander was if not for loading ready run. So that's one thing. But on the other hand, loading ready run is not Canadian Highlander. It's not the same thing. Highlander is what it is because of the strength of the format. It's because of the rabid communities, be them online, in Victoria, in other pockets around the world. Like, Canlander is a format that admittedly would reach a level even without loading ready runs push. Might not be the same level, but it would be like this would be a format that would exist with a passionate player base without lure, right? They're two separate things, but you gotta admit, like, it is the lure has had a real impact on the popularity of the format and the reach of the format, right? Like, it's one thing to be like, I wrote this article and or like I put this VOD on YouTube, but it hit X amount of views and they got a bunch of people getting in the format from that, to a VOD with like 100 or like 200,000 views, right? Like that's going to do a lot more to pull people in. But the two are separate. And so there's kind of this tension between that, but ultimately Premiere is kind of funny, right? It's clean, it's catchy, and it sounds good. Yeah, single word, sounds good, ends with a consonant, great. It's Canadian, vaguely. If you don't know that, if you're not familiar, we in Canada, the leaders of our provinces, the leaders of the political parties at the head of on a provincial level are premiers. They are the premiers. So there's the premier of British Columbia, the premier of Nova Scotia, whatever. And so that ties it, right? which is Canadian. And then it's boastful, but not in a bad way, right? It's not like saying, I am the best. It's not saying you are beneath me. It is saying, like, yeah, I'm here. I'm at the top, right? Which I think is pretty good. That's important. That's a good thing, right? You don't have to be humble and be like, oh, well, I guess it's okay. You know, you could be like, yeah, this format fucking rules. You should play this format. What up? How you doing? Come on in. The water's great, you know? The cons, again, it suffers from century, premier. Like, even though there is going to be a little bit of a difference in pronunciation, that is also just something that is going to be difficult for people where English is not their primary language. It's going to be a little confusing to people that English is their primary language, right? It can trip people up, and it's not descriptive of the format, right? It's like, well, what does this mean? I mean, you can, I guess, in a way, you can play the best cards, but you know, it lacks in certain parts. And then yeah, you can be the premier format of the pilot. And then yes, it's a little issue. There's an issue with premier play, but you know, not a huge issue. Not a huge issue, because of course they're abolishing premier play. I'm just kidding, of course. They're trying to make it good. Boontf, welcome back for the 14th month. Super happy #1 card time. Thank you for the support. What are you doing? Or what are you doing? How you doing? How you been? Aboria, welcome back for the 49th month. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I'm excited to brew and play some Canlander and brew some really bad decks, like a Pod Hulk deck I'm calling Greed, Eggs, and Ham. Hell yeah. That just sounds like old Sandy B. This is a hypothetical change, but one that I would like to see become an official change at some point in time. But it's kind of narrowing down what it is, you know? 10 squared? In 10 squared, can I play 102 cards? Pointed is one that we talked about. Although it's not as flattering of a definition as you would want it to be. You know? Pointed. Expressing criticism in a direct and an ambiguous way. You could call it point slander, but that's also just, you know, 7 Point does that. It's, there's a lot. I like Boundless. I like Boundless and Canlander. Those are my two favorite ones. Yeah, point slander. Yeah. Don't call out the point system. It makes it clunky. It makes it a little too, like, chiseled into this very specific approach. I think that if you're going to go with a name that is like more directly related to like the construction of the format or whatever, then if you're going with a name that is more inside baseball, Canlander's better, you know? Yeah, Canlander or Boundless. Those are my two goes. Speaking of, do you want to draft? Let's draft. Good 2-hour long talk. I mean, goated is kind of funny. We could call it goated.